I didn't plan to notice Lucas the way I did. It happened quietly, the way certain mistakes begin, without drama, without intention, just a shift in attention I didn't bother correcting. We met through a mutual routine, the kind that repeats often enough to feel harmless. A shared space, familiar faces, polite nods that slowly turned into conversations that lasted a little longer than they needed to. Lucas had an ease about him that made people trust him quickly. He spoke carefully, as if he was used to being misunderstood and had learned how to avoid it. When he smiled, it wasn't wide or careless. It was restrained, thoughtful, like he was always measuring what he revealed. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. I'm Ethan. I've always believed I was good at reading people, especially men who carried quiet contradictions. Lucas was full of them. He listened more than he talked, but when he did speak, his words stayed with me. He asked questions that felt intentional, not polite. Questions about what I wanted, not what I did. That alone made him different. There were signs, of course. There are always signs. His phone was never far from his hand, but he rarely checked it in front of me. When it buzzed, he'd glance down, then silence it without explanation. Once, when I joked about him being mysterious, his smile tightened for half a second, so brief I almost missed it. Some habits are hard to explain, he said. I laughed it off, even though something in his tone warned me not to push. Over time, we began finding reasons to be alone. Coffee that turned into walks. Walks that stretched longer than planned. Conversations that drifted into confessions but stopped just short of names and facts. Lucas talked about feeling unseen, about how life can narrow without you noticing. He never mentioned anyone specific. No partner, no past, just a vague sense of dissatisfaction he carried like a carefully folded letter in his pocket. I should have asked more. I didn't. The attraction between us didn't arrive all at once. It built itself patiently, through glances held a second too long and silences that felt charged instead of awkward. When our hands brushed by accident, neither of us moved away quickly. That hesitation told me more than words could have. Still, Lucas kept a boundary I couldn't quite define. He never let the conversation drift too far into the future. If I hinted at plans, he redirected. If I joked about labels, he smiled and changed the subject. It wasn't rejection, it was containment. As if he was enjoying the closeness but carefully managing its limits. One evening, after a long conversation that left me feeling strangely exposed, Lucas hesitated before leaving. He stood there, keys in hand, eyes unfocused, like he was arguing with himself. "Do you want to come over sometime?" he asked finally. The question sounded casual, but his voice wasn't. There was weight behind it. Risk. I didn't answer right away. I knew enough to sense that this invitation came with conditions I hadn't been told about yet. Still, curiosity has a way of dulling caution. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, "I'd like that." He exhaled, relieved and tense at the same time. "Just, don't tell anyone you were there." I should have asked why. I should have paused long enough to let doubt catch up with desire. Instead, I agreed, telling myself it was harmless. People liked privacy. That didn't mean anything on its own. But as I walked home that night, his words replayed in my mind. Not the invitation, the warning. It followed me like a quiet echo, reminding me that whatever was unfolding between us already required secrecy. And once secrecy enters a story, it rarely leaves without taking something with it. Lucas's apartment was quieter than I expected. Not empty, just controlled. Every surface was clean without feeling staged, as if order was something he relied on rather than performed. When he closed the door behind us, the sound landed heavier than it should have. A solid click. Final. He turned the lock with a small, practiced motion, then looked at me, searching my face as though gauging whether I'd noticed. I had. "Sorry," he said, too quickly. "Habit." I nodded, even though my pulse had picked up. The room felt suddenly smaller, not in a threatening way, but in the way intimacy compresses space. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving, the air between us charged with what we hadn't said yet. Lucas broke the silence by offering me a drink. His hands shook just enough to give him away. Whatever calm he carried in public didn't fully follow him home. That realization softened something in me. It made him feel more human, more reachable. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first. He talked about work, about routines, about how strange it felt to have someone new in his space. I listened, absorbing the careful rhythm of his voice. When I spoke, he leaned in slightly, as if proximity made the conversation safer for him. You ever feel like you're living a version of your life someone else chose? He asked. The question caught me off guard. I answered honestly, and when I did, something shifted. The distance between us closed without either of us moving deliberately. Our knees touched. Neither of us apologized. Lucas told me about loneliness that didn't come from being alone, about how silence can be loud when it's shared with the wrong person. He never named anyone. He never had to. The absence itself became its own presence, hovering in the room like an uninvited witness. I wanted to reach for him. I didn't. The restraint felt respectful, even though desire pressed against it. When he finally turned to me, his eyes were open in a way I hadn't seen before, unguarded, almost pleading. This stays here, he said quietly. Whatever this is. I understood what he meant, even if I didn't fully understand why. I told myself it was about privacy, about taking things slowly. I told myself that if there were rules, it meant he was trying to do this right. When he leaned closer, it wasn't rushed. It was tentative, like he was asking permission without words. The closeness felt intimate not because of touch, but because of trust, or at least the illusion of it. For a moment, the rest of the world receded. There was just the sound of our breathing and the weight of everything unspoken. Then his phone vibrated. Lucas stiffened instantly. He didn't check the screen. He didn't need to. His jaw tightened, and he reached over to silence it with a familiarity that unsettled me. The moment fractured, not completely, but enough to let doubt seep back in. Sorry, he said again, standing up. It's nothing. I watched him move around the room, noticed how he avoided certain areas, certain objects. On a shelf near the hallway, I saw a framed photo turned face down. Not hidden, just deliberately unseen. I didn't ask about it. The fact that it existed felt like information enough. When Lucas sat back down, there was a new urgency in him. He spoke faster, as if afraid of running out of time. He told me how rare this felt, how unexpected. He said my name in a way that lingered, and I felt myself being drawn deeper, even as warning signs stacked quietly in the background. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. Not yet. I hadn't crossed any lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Still, when Lucas reached for my hand and held it a second longer than necessary, I didn't pull away. Later, when I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. His hand rested on the lock, fingers curled around it like it mattered. Next time, he said, not quite a promise. As I stepped out into the hallway, I felt the shift immediately, the return of space, of distance, of clarity I hadn't realized I'd lost. Behind me, the door closed softly, and I knew that whatever we had started wasn't meant to exist in the open. And somehow, that knowledge made it feel more powerful, and more dangerous, than I was ready to admit. I didn't mean to find out the way I did. Discoveries like that rarely come with intention. They arrive through carelessness, timing, or the quiet arrogance of believing you're safe from consequences. For me, it happened on an ordinary evening that Lucas had insisted would be brief. He seemed distracted the moment I arrived. Not distant, nervous. His attention fractured easily, his answers arriving half a second late, as though he were listening to something I couldn't hear. When his phone buzzed this time, he checked it. I caught the name before he turned the screen away. Mark. The name landed harder than I expected. It wasn't curiosity that followed, it was recognition. The kind that doesn't need explanation. Lucas saw my expression change. He didn't ask what was wrong. He knew. That's just someone from home, he said, already retreating into a rehearsed tone. He worries too much. Home. The word settled between us, heavy and unmistakable. I waited for more, for a correction, a clarification, something that would undo the implication, but it never came. Silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping in front of me. I was going to tell you, he said. That sentence has a way of arriving too late in stories like this. It's never meant for the moment it's spoken. It belongs to the past, to an earlier version of the truth that no longer exists. Tell me what? I asked, though I already knew. He exhaled slowly, like a man bracing for impact. Mark and I were together. We've been together for a long time. Together, not were. The room felt suddenly unfamiliar, like the furniture had shifted while I wasn't looking. Every conversation replayed itself in my head, reorganizing around this new fact. The silences, the boundaries, the locked door. You said you were lonely, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I am, Lucas replied quickly. That doesn't change. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the version he had offered so carefully. So what is this, then? He hesitated, choosing his words with the same precision I had once found attractive. It doesn't mean what you think. It's just something that happened. Something I needed, as if desire were a necessity and honesty an optional luxury. I stood up, the movement abrupt enough to startle him. You let me believe there was nothing else. I never lied, he said, immediately defensive. The statement hung there, technically true and morally hollow. He hadn't lied. He had curated, edited, left out entire chapters and trusted me to fill the gaps with hope. Does he know? I asked. Lucas looked away. That was answer enough. A sound came from the hallway then, the unmistakable click of a key in a lock. Lucas froze. For a brief, surreal moment, neither of us moved. Then he grabbed my arm, not roughly, but urgently. He's not supposed to be back yet, he whispered. The door opened. Footsteps crossed the threshold. A voice, calm, familiar, intimate in a way that cut deeper than anger ever could. Lucas. I didn't see Mark clearly. I didn't need to. His presence filled the apartment in a way Lucas's loneliness never had. Real, established, inescapable. Lucas stepped forward, positioning himself between us, as if that could still control the damage. I'll handle this, he said, more to me than to Mark. Handle this, like a problem to be managed, not people to be reckoned with. I looked at Lucas one last time. At the man who had locked doors and silenced phones and asked for secrecy like it was romance. You already did, I said quietly. As I reached the door, my hand closed around the same lock that had once made me feel chosen. Now it felt like a test. I turned it without hesitation and stepped into the hallway, my chest tight but my mind painfully clear. Behind me, voices overlapped, confusion, explanations, damage control, but I didn't stay to hear them. For the first time since meeting Lucas, I understood exactly what I had been invited into. And I knew I couldn't unknow it. I didn't hear from Lucas for 3 days. The silence felt deliberate, not respectful. It gave me too much space to think, to replay moments I had once romanticized and now saw clearly. Secrecy hadn't been a side effect of our connection, it had been its foundation. When his message finally came, it was short and careful. I didn't mean to hurt you. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking my phone and setting it face down, mirroring the photo I'd once noticed in his apartment. Some gestures don't deserve a response. I tried to return to my routines, to the version of myself that existed before Lucas. But the smallest things brought him back, the sound of a door closing too softly, a phone buzzing in another room, the way my name had once sounded in his mouth. I wasn't heartbroken in the dramatic sense. I was disoriented. It's unsettling to realize you were present for something that was never meant to exist. I wondered about Mark more than I wanted to admit. Not out of jealousy, but out of a strange solidarity. We had both been living in a reality Lucas shaped to suit himself. The difference was that Mark had history, time, shared walls. I had only moments and silences. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. I saw Lucas once after that, by accident. He looked the same, composed, intact, untouched by the damage he'd caused. He didn't approach me. He didn't have to. Distance had already done the work for him. As we passed each other, his eyes flickered with something like regret, but it wasn't enough to stop him. It never had been. I learned something uncomfortable in the aftermath. Being chosen in secret isn't being chosen at all. It's being used to fill a gap someone refuses to address honestly. I had mistaken attention for intention, intimacy for courage. It took time to forgive myself for that. I thought often about the moment he locked the door, how it had felt like an invitation. In truth, it had been a warning. A signal that whatever happened inside that space would not survive daylight. I had ignored it because part of me wanted to be special enough to change the rules. I wasn't, and that was the point. The experience didn't harden me, but it clarified something essential. Love that requires erasure, of truth, of people, of accountability, is not love worth carrying. Desire without responsibility leaves wreckage behind, even when it pretends to be gentle. I don't know what became of Lucas and Mark. I don't need to. Their story was never mine to resolve. Mine ended the moment I chose the hallway over the locked room, the moment I accepted discomfort instead of complicity. Sometimes I think about how easily it could have gone differently. How another version of me might have stayed, justified, settled for fragments. That version feels distant now, like someone I once knew but no longer recognize. What stayed with me wasn't Lucas. It was the knowledge of my own boundaries, where they had been too soft, where they finally held. It was the understanding that clarity often arrives disguised as loss. And when I hear stories that begin the way mine did, with secrecy, with half-truths, with doors locked for convenience, I listen differently now. Not with judgment, but with recognition. Because I know how quietly those stories begin. And I know exactly where they led.